there we go. Perfect. All right. I'm feeling super grateful today for both of my parents who have been helping me out trying to figure out my hectic, trying to get a car and move to Colorado for my job. So thank you. Dad's here. Mom said she might be able to make it, but I don't think she's here yet. But yeah, thank you to both of them. I would love if everyone could just type real quick in the chat something they're feeling grateful for today. I'll give you a few moments to do that. I just want to start this off with some gratitude. Thanks, Jesus, or Jesus. Thanks, Melanie. Oh yeah, that good air quality, that's a good one. It's a good one, Rod. Got a lot of good weather. We're blessed in California. Oh, Jacob, harsh. Great, thank you all so much. I don't, you can keep sharing, but I'm gonna keep moving. So today's workshop, we're gonna focus on identifying some invasive species that can be found locally in Santa Barbara area. But not all of these species are just local to Santa Barbara. Many of them you can find throughout California and even the rest of the United States and North America. And I'll have like distribution maps on there for you. But we also want to kind of focus on giving you a good idea of what you can do about them if you see them, or how to prevent spreading them. I helped teach a Leave No Trace class, or a couple Leave No Trace classes, and so some of this information that I'm showing you today is kind of copied from that, although most of it is my work, so it's not like I'm stealing someone else's work. Please feel free to type any questions, comments, or concerns into the chat if you have them. I'll also invite questions via mic at 2 points during my presentation today. So then you're welcome to turn your mic on at that point as well. All right, please share in the chat what you think defines an invasive species. Just quick couple words, maybe a sentence, whatever works for you. Non-native, okay, not endemic to the area. Yeah, I agree. Not native to the area, thanks. They take away resources from native species. Okay, that's a good one. Yeah, so someone mentioned not native. And yes, that is part of it, but not all non-native species are invasive. So keep that in mind as you're walking through life. Just because you see a plant that's from a different country, it doesn't mean that it's defined as invasive. So the definition I have here for you today: an invasive species is a non-indigenous species that spreads from the point of introduction and becomes abundant. This invasive species label attaches only to populations of species whose impact upon introduction has altered their new environment, typically with negative consequences. Common characteristics of an invasive species are it grows and reproduces very rapidly, it spreads aggressively, and it competes with non-native species, with native species for resources. So really, like your common houseplant or something is not going to be a native species, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be super harmful. Like, it's not going to grow or reproduce, most likely, honestly. It's not going to spread aggressively, and it's not going to compete for resources. But there are many species that do a lot of damage and would be considered invasive. Okay, so some fun or not so fun facts, depending on who's listening, about invasive species are they're a huge drain on the US economy, but also world economies. In the US, they cost about $120 billion per year to control. And, you know, by control, like, I put that in quotes because really we're not controlling them, we're just mitigating the symptoms. They're also the second leading cause of habitat loss in the United States, the first being human development. And and they also reduce biodiversity, they affect food webs, and they contribute to 42% of threatened and endangered species. So big issues, big issues. Okay, how do invasive species spread? You can see I got some pictures on here, like burrs attached to socks or to dog ears. But they can also spread naturally by air, water, and other species. And they can spread in other ways by humans, like when they cling to bike tires, boat treads, boot treads, boat holes. When you're transporting firewood from one place to another, it can stick to that. Pets can transfer them, and they can also stick to camping gear. So keep that in mind. What can you do to prevent the spread of invasive species? There's actually a lot of things. If you ever take a boat out, please clean, drain, and dry your boat to prevent aquatic invasive species from spreading. It's pretty hard to see them, so you need to be very careful with fishing equipment as well. They're usually very small. Rarely you're going to get an entire mussel, but you might have like the little baby like pre-mussel stick into your gear. Also, if you decide that you want a fire where you're camping or wherever you're going to recreate, it's best for you to bring local firewood or certified firewood, or use firewood that you find right where you're at, because often people are accidentally bringing in beetles and other kinds of invasive species that are pretty gnarly to local ecosystems. Clean all your clothing and equipment before entering caves to prevent the spread of white nose syndrome in bats. Use Clorox to decontaminate equipment. Don't ruin your gear. I'm sure there's other ways, like Clorox might not be the best option for some gear. And avoid going to caves where bats are hibernating for the winter, because you can wipe out whole 1,000 bat colonies really easily if you're not careful. If you have stock animals, horses, cows, etc., only use certified weed-free hay.
If we start to come off the screen and we see that all on-ball defender.
Sorry, someone has their mic undone. Thank you, Josh. Yeah, use certified weed-free hay, please. Yeah, moving on. Okay, so clean hiking materials like boots and tires. Clean your pet's fur and paws in between toes, especially when they've interacted in water. You can also volunteer at a local nature center or volunteer to help pull out invasive weeds or capture invasive animals. Spread the word to others, like, hey, this is what you should do if you see an invasive species. You can get involved in recording and reporting invasive species if you see them on things like iNaturalist, or even just go to your nearby like ranger or something and be like, hey, I saw this and maybe you should check that out. And finally, you could become an invasivore, which I'm a plant nerd, so of course I'd bring this up. Basically, for those of you who like to forage and eat wild-growing plants, you can join this movement out there of people that either only eat or eat in large part plants and animals, I guess, that are invasive, to help do their small part in reducing populations of these invasive species. If you check out this website I've been working on for the last 4 years, the IB Ethnobotany Project website, we've got a lot of edible plants on there. And there's a couple notable invasive species we've got on there, like chickweed and ice plant, and we hope to get a couple other ones on there as well. But yeah, so any questions so far? Feel free to put them in the chat or say them out loud.
Kirsten, are you suggesting that ice plant is edible?
Yes. So ice plant.
Say more about that.
Yeah, of course. So ice plant in some, I think in Latin, the Latin name for ice plant actually means edible. And some people call them sea figs, in fact, because the fruit that they produce under the flower is edible, or once the flower dies off, but it's like it's underneath the flower where it would be. That part is edible. In Santa Barbara area, the fruits rarely develop, or they don't develop very well, but there are certain climates in which they do develop very well, and they're apparently pretty tasty, if not a little bit salty. The leaves, the succulent leaves, also are technically edible. I've tried one, and it was actually the most disgusting thing I've ever eaten. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend eating ice plant, at least in our local area, especially since they're usually where dogs can pee or people spray pesticides. But yes, if you find a clean patch in good climate for it, the fruits are supposed to be tasty, and I think the leaves are also used, or can be used as a local, what's the term? Like painkiller, for lack of a better term, but like if you've got a little cut and it hurts a little bit, I think you can like wipe that slimy, like broken leaf on it.
So there's a difference between edible and palatable.
Yes, so it's not palatable, but technically you can eat it. Like if you were starving to death. Did anyone else have any questions before we continue?
What does palatable mean?
Palatable is like tastiness level. So like, for example, I mean, I guess
So he means that it's good, it's edible, but it's not good.
it's not
taste
good. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's honestly a lot of like wild growing foods are kind of like that. They're like, yeah, you can eat it, but only eat it if you're so desperate and have no other options. Yeah.
I don't think I can eat many plants around my neighborhood.
Yeah, it's a little disappointing.
Yeah.
Anyone else? My mom, Sharon Rose, just suggested that I come up with a recipe to make it tasty. Yeah, I'm not sure there's anything you could do to make ice plant very good, but thanks for the suggestion. All right, well, I'm going to keep going. Feel free to add anything in the chat if you have anything come up. All right, I don't know if y'all know how to annotate, but at the top of your screen, if you're on a computer, you should be able to click like a little pull down menu or something next to the part that says Kirsten is sharing her screen, and then click annotate at the bottom of that. So I would like you to add to the screen here any invasive species you know about, either locally or globally or anything. They can be animals, plants, insects, diseases, whatever. If you've heard of an invasive species, I'd love for you to add it to the screen here. Or share it in the chat and I'll add it to the screen. Okay, thanks, Melanie. And you can actually type in annotate with a text box if you prefer, whoever is scribbling it on. I don't know if you prefer that. But. All right. Oh, somebody overlapped with somebody else. All right. Oh my goodness. Somebody keeps calling me. All right, cool. Ah. Someone added ice plant. Thank you. Ooh, that was fun. I'm trying to add people's chat ones, but there we go. All right, cool. These are all really good ones. Thanks, y'all. Yeah, so just a note on weeds. Weeds are, I hate to say it, they're a social construct. So anything can be considered a weed as long as you don't want it in your garden. So not necessarily all weeds are invasive, although some definitely are. Some weeds can just be native growing wild plants that somebody's like, well, I didn't plant that, I don't want it. So be careful when you throw a term like weeds around. So we got zebra mussels, that's a great one. Radish, at least in our area, is native, I believe. The wild radish, sorry. Broom, that's like a horribly invasive one around here. I'll touch on it later. Iguanas, I think in some areas are invasive. I don't know much about them. The trumpet flower, I don't know if there's a lot of plants that fall under like trumpet flower category. So if you're thinking morning glory, definitely invasive. I'm not sure if all trumpet flowers are. Lionfish, I've heard pretty gnarly things about lionfish. Humans, yes. I didn't add it to my presentation, but I don't disagree with that. Eucalyptus tree, not all eucalyptus trees are invasive, but some like the blue gum definitely are pretty bad. Cool. All right, so like the plant nerd, oh, sorry. I didn't add any invasive mammals to my presentation today just because they kind of are mostly rodents, and I didn't really want to focus on rodents today. But of course, because I'm a plant nerd, I'm going to share a bunch of I'm going to share a bunch of plants because I love plants, and I've got a couple other common invasive species that you'll see commonly around here. So okay, ice plant, like I talked about, this one's from South Africa, and it was actually introduced intentionally as an erosion stabilizer on the coast of California. It still kind of participates in that, but it also chokes out any other species. And it looks like it's kind of taken over a bunch of other areas that maybe have cliffs and erosion problems. If you can see this global distribution map. Chickweed, another delicious edible that we have around here, is from the Eurasian area, which is a very large area, but definitely not the United States. I couldn't figure out how exactly it was introduced, but my guess it was either accidentally as animal feed, like in hay or something that they brought over, or brought over intentionally by humans because it's such a good wild edible to eat. You could put it in your garden, actually. Black mustard, you'll see that everywhere, kind of just popping up in open fields and stuff, or intentionally planted in vineyards. I think it helps like condition the soil for vineyards that stay there all year, every year for hundreds of years, and are just sucking out all the good nutrients from the soil. I think the black mustard actually helps in those cases. And there's a fun story about how, I think it's accurate, I don't know, I've heard it from multiple sources, that the Spanish monks who came to like help the colonization process of the coast of California, they would plant it along the El Camino Real as a way to like pave the way for themselves so they never get lost. And then it just, obviously it spread out from there and just took over, not so dissimilarly from how they maybe took over. Oh, did somebody accidentally write this on there? Sorry, I'm gonna clear that. All right, somebody mentioned broom earlier as well. That is an invasive plant that we are unlucky to have. It's pretty much like unkillable from what I can tell. Like you can tear it from the roots, and if you leave one root left, it'll still keep going. If you cut it down, but it's already started producing flowers, apparently the flowers can keep growing, get pollinated, and create seeds, and then drop seeds, and then seed, even if you cut it down. It's just like if you leave it. So you need to like clear out every single sign of broom if you're trying to get rid of this plant. It's pretty. My mom loves it. But it's gnarly, and once it gets started, it takes over. I mean, you can see it's taken over Chile, looks like, and all of the west of Europe and all of the United States. Um, okay, so this is just a couple other species I just thought I'd throw on here that are plants. We also have a lot of non-native grasses that kind of choke out other plants. But the pampas grass is a pretty gnarly one, that top left. People accidentally spread it after like trying to regrow hillsides after fires in California, and it's just bad. They're not meant to be here. And the morning glory, beautiful plant, but it chokes out other plants. The thistle, also kind of attractive but very spiky, and that takes over. Castor bean is a pretty gnarly one just because it's super poisonous to humans and kills children and like livestock and like things yearly. So it's pretty gnarly. Yeah. So a couple invasive birds that I just shared two here because you'll see them everywhere pretty much. The dove, well, the Eurasian dove is non-native. I think it's the one that specifically has the collar. We do have a couple native ones, but like this bird specifically like knocks those ones out of their niches because it just kind of takes over their food, and it's not attacked by predators and just like a bunch of other things like that. And I learned that this species actually was introduced in the 70s when a pet shop owner accidentally released a couple of its birds and then just decided to release the rest of its flock. And they just took over. Like these birds were like released in one city and then they just spread in the United States, which is pretty wild. The starling you'll see again pretty much everywhere. And I learned that this bird was released, or 100 of these birds were released in Central Park in the 1800s by a group of Shakespeare fans who wanted every single bird that Shakespeare mentions in any of his writings to exist in Central Park. And they just took over. They apparently push out native nesting birds, spread invasive seeds, and do damage to crops. So they probably cost us a lot of money every year. And I've also got a couple reptiles and amphibians for you. I just chose the most recognizable ones. For example, the red-eared slider is a turtle that you'll see at the Little Pond and Stork Tower Courtyard if you're a UCSB student or staff. But these dudes destroy aquatic ecosystems by like taking over the food chain. And they're often bought as pets when they're like little babies that are, smaller than your palm. And then they get to like big, huge sizes and people are like, oh my gosh, what do I do with this? Like, I don't want this in my house anymore. And they'll just kind of drop it in a pond thinking, oh, be free. Not good. Don't do that. The American bullfrog is also pretty gnarly. It's from the United States. It's mostly from east of the Rockies. And I think people released it maybe in a failed attempt to control invasive species, but then they just took over all the aquatic ecosystems as well. And they kind of boot out all the native frogs and bullfrogs and just harm everything. It's not ideal. I also decided to throw in a couple invasive insects just to show you that invasive species aren't just big. So like the ash borer, that has destroyed forests all over the United States, and it makes it, they kill the trees and then they're more susceptible to burning because the trees are all dead, it's a lot of dry wood, or you wipe out an entire species. I believe all of the New York ashes are gone. There is not a single one left. And mosquitoes, there are native mosquitoes and there are invasive mosquitoes, but mosquitoes are also vectors for diseases that are invasive, like yellow fever. So pretty gnarly. It's very interesting, like how much damage certain species can do. At this point, does anyone have any questions? I'm pretty much done. You can ask me anything at all.
What about hummingbirds?
What about them?
Aren't they like? I thought they were invasive, or are they predatory?
Interesting. We definitely, so there's a bunch of species of hummingbirds to my knowledge. There might be some, like an invasive species of them. I don't know. I also don't think they're predatory. They're nectar eating birds. Like they drink like flower juice basically.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I could look it up real quick, but off the top of my head, I don't know anything about hummingbirds.
That's okay.
Yeah. Thanks for asking, Jesus. Sorry. Yeah, I haven't read about them being a problem, but that doesn't mean that they're not. And I'm sure the native ones are. Sorry.
I just remember from a class, a professor was telling me about that, but
Interesting. Well, now I'm curious. Here,
I don't really remember though. I feel like he said one of the two, but since you said it's not predatory, then it's probably invasive.
I mean, I guess it's possible that there is a predatory one, but they've got these like the little beak that the proboscis comes out of. Are
Oh yeah, they're territorial.
Thanks, Steph.
They're territorial.
Yeah, I don't think there are invasive ones locally, but anyone else?
I don't have a question, but because you said the ash borer is invasive in, I guess, the East Coast, there's also, I don't know if they're also on the West Coast, but there's a shawhole borer.
Yeah.
In like, so where I live, which is like Southern California, LA Valley area, a lot of the oak trees get eaten by the shawhole borer. So cool.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think there are there's like bark beetles and pines around here. And I mean, there's a bunch of different species. I only like put a couple that I've heard of and that I think other people have heard of. I was just up in Utah and we saw whole forests that were just no live trees or only very young live trees. And I looked it up and apparently the ash borer had gotten there and just decimated. But yeah, I believe that the shot-hole borer, that's definitely, I've heard of those, so. Pine species. Okay, so someone asked, oh, sorry, there's a couple questions. What do you think of genetically modified mosquitoes? Interesting. Are these the ones that they're genetically modifying so that they can't produce children? They're like sterile? Children, offspring? Yes. I think that every single attempt that humans have made to, not every single, but like 99% of attempts humans have made to introduce an invasive species to reduce other invasive species has been a horrible idea. And I think that humans trying to reduce mosquito populations has the potential for massive disaster because although mosquitoes harm humans in some ways, they're also part of food webs. And if you take out an entire massive species, then you're reducing food for birds, reptiles, amphibians, mammals. You've just decimated an entire like section of a food web. I don't think it's a good idea, but time will tell, I guess. And I'm not an expert, but that's a personal opinion. Someone else asked, are developing countries more affected by invasive species than countries like the US? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. It's very possible that there could be more or less economic damage and more or less ecological damage, depending on a lot of things, like what got introduced and how are they dealing with it, how much does it affect the human population. So yeah, I don't have a good answer for that at the moment. My dad TC says, I think the goal with the genetically modified mosquitoes is to produce offspring that cannot carry things like malaria. And that's Yeah, maybe. I thought it was they were intentionally trying to make them sterile to reduce populations, but it's possible that they're somehow making them unable
Yeah.
to carry a disease. But I
Yeah.
don't.
I think
Oh.
they did that with the Zika virus. I'm not sure though.
Oh,
But I heard them do something like that, what TC said.
cool. Yeah, I think I read something about that they were trying to release them in Florida, but I didn't really get into details on it. Very interesting, very odd.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. That's all I've got for y'all. If you have any other questions or not, I will be having another workshop next week on Saturday at 12 p.m. Saturday the 5th at 12 p.m. I, at the moment, cannot remember what the topic is going to be on, but it will be probably plants, knowing me, or maybe natural hazards that we can find and how to avoid them or keep ourselves safe during them. Thanks, Rod. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Yeah. Yes, I'll stick around for a bit if anyone wants to chat or has any other questions. So, oh, and I'll stop recording. Forgot about that. Let's see.